Well, again, welcome everyone to Global Ties Alabama's Global Perspective Institute today on the 9th of November, 2021. Today's subject is on studying abroad and how it's going to affect your career. Earlier, we were talking about how good an opportunity it would be to share this, having received the good news yesterday that international travel is starting to ramp up both in and out of the U.S. We thought it'd be appropriate for the rest of our network to know that studying abroad is going to be ramping up too with that news. So today we have a great panel. Currently, we have three of our panelists here. We have Matt Tucker, Rory DeFiore, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, and Jacob Inglis. Today, we will start with Matt Tucker, who's going to be sharing his experience with studying abroad. He has very in-depth knowledge of studying abroad, having spent time in Russia as a assistant resident director for the American Institute for Foreign Studies student exchange program in St. Petersburg, Russia. He's earned a master's in Russian and Eurasian studies from the European University in St. Petersburg, spending 7 years in total working and studying in Russia. He's originally from Alabama in Birmingham, where he completed his BA in political science at Birmingham Southern College. Matt, will you take it away?
Sure, thanks. I appreciate that. You stole all the background I had to share. I'm just kidding, but yeah. So I just wanted to give everyone a little bit about my background, what I do now, and why I think studying abroad is a good idea, and how it influenced me and my career, and then just in the way I think about things and approach daily life and problems that come up. So as you said, I'm Matt Tucker, the current program manager for the Open World program at the Congressional Office for International Leadership, formerly known as the Open World Leadership Center. Just recently changed our name. So we run a professional exchange program for Congress. And right now we work in about 20 countries. Program started started in Russia, then it expanded to the post-Soviet space, and we work in mostly Russian-speaking countries. And as a Russian speaker, I run our Russian program and then also our Central Asia program and a few others. But I'm originally from Birmingham, the west side of Birmingham. My parents still live in Jasper, Alabama. And as a kid growing up, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of culture outside of my community. My family did come from an immigrant community. My mother is Polish, but I mean that was back in the time when it wasn't really popular to be an immigrant, and that culture just got lost. My mother didn't speak Polish. My grandfather was the last who could speak a little bit, but it's pretty much gone. So the only experience I had with global or any kind of other culture were the few Latino students we had in high school, and I was always interested by their culture. I also played soccer, so I got to know several of them very well because we played soccer together. I was always fascinated by just different people from different backgrounds, and I was always interested in history and culture and current events, what was going on in the world, that kind of thing. So when I got to Birmingham Southern, where, as you said, I did my undergraduate degree, I majored in political science and focused on international relations. And I knew that I wanted to study abroad, but I was also an athlete, and that made things even more difficult because, you have your season, and then in the off season, you still have to train, and you're not really free to go abroad. So eventually what I did was take an extended 5th year, and I spent a full academic year in St. Petersburg, Russia, studying Russian language and culture, and lived with a host family. So, and when I finished that, as you said, I did my master's degree in Russia as well at the European University. And really that was just because, at that time, it was 2008 and the economy in the US had just kind of took a hit. So there wasn't a lot to rush back to. And I couldn't really afford graduate school in the US at the time. I still can't, but I didn't want to go into debt. So I was like, if you're going to study Russian and about Russia, we're better to do that than Russia itself. So took that opportunity to stay abroad and get my master's degree there. And then I ended up working in study abroad, actually, with a program there in St. Petersburg. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years before I came back to the States. So in total, I was in Russia for seven years, which is a long time. And so basically, I mean, obviously, I'm a big supporter of study abroad. And personally, when I look back, on my time as a student studying abroad and then living abroad, I can't help but notice even today how much of an impact that had on my worldview. As a kid from semi-rural Alabama, who didn't have a lot of experience outside of his community. And I think one of the biggest benefits of having that international experience is that it gives you, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and kind of see something from their point of view, or for a different point of view in general. And that's incredibly important thing to do if you're trying to understand, why people do things that they do, or why they think the way that they think. That experience will help you tackle a problem in a different way than if you only had, a single-minded approach. And so going forward, I mean, I think this is one of the key things that our current community and country leaders need more of, right? To work together, and not just with our own people, but with people from around the world. And this is an essential skill if we're going to try to solve some of the global problems that we all face. So that's why I'm a big advocate of increased exchanges. I think all university students should be required to study abroad. I think for at least one semester. And at Birmingham Southern, we were on a 4-1-4 schedule. So we had a fall semester, a winter semester, and then a spring semester. So even if it was for that one little mini, January semester, I think all students should be required to study abroad at some point, because I think it's so impactful just on their development. You'll learn so much about yourself, the world, everyone's place in it, and it'll just make you a stronger person. And I just think it's an essential skill that we should all have. So I was hoping there would be more students on who were thinking about studying abroad, and I could encourage them to do that. So I hope that if any of you have interactions with students, all right. I did want to just say the last thing is that, and I'm sure all of you who have studied abroad know this, that it is called study abroad for a reason. Having studied abroad myself and have worked with students who are studying abroad, I always tell them, you have plenty of time to party with all the other American students on your program. So there certainly is time for that, but also take the advantage to immerse yourself in the culture, to get to know the locals, and to volunteer, and to get involved in the community as much as you can while you're there, and just challenge yourself in those situations, and it's going to make a much better experience. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer some questions.
That is great. We're going to save the questions for the Q&A at the end if we do have any questions. Next, we're going to go to Lori. I'm going to let her explain more about American Council on the Critical Language Scholarship Program, as well as her experience with the ISEP Study Abroad program. I think with her experience, anybody that is interested can get a lot of details from her. I know she's going to share some links and some different addresses for us to follow up with. Take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Josh. So yes, to introduce myself, so my name is Roy DeFiore. I work in communications for the Critical Language Scholarship Program at American Councils. The CLS program, as we fondly call it. So it is a program sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, and students who are enrolled in a U.S. college or university can study abroad at no cost to the students. So it is a fully funded program that takes place every summer for 8 weeks, usually beginning in June. And it is because we've really identified, as Matt mentioned, we want more US citizens to have a expanded worldview. And in particular, we know that there's a really huge need for students to be able to speak what we identify as critical languages. And a critical language is a language that's not commonly taught in schools, but we've identified as being really important for US diplomatic efforts and also economic prosperity of the US. So there are 15 of them that we offer through the CLS program. And in a little bit, I'll drop a link so you all can check that out. The amazing thing is, I think language learning can be a bit intimidating. I know sometimes when people are first thinking about study abroad, their mind goes to English-speaking countries. But I would really challenge any students interested in studying abroad to think outside of that, because not only can you be immersed in a new culture. Being immersed in another language is an amazing gateway for understanding that culture. And it gives you skills that are going to absolutely make you more attractive to future employers. Um, my conversations with CLS alumni, um, all of them all of them explain the reason they're hired at their current jobs because of their program. There is no, it is a major factor in why they got hired, because they, at the end of this program, they have very well developed language skills. They've participated in another thing that makes CLS very unique is you stay with a host family. You have a language partner. You receive a lot of hands-on learning, and you participate in a small group cohort where you really get to bond. Another aspect of study abroad that's so amazing is because you're so outside of your comfort zone, I really think it results in the most amazing friendships and relationships that form through it. So that those people will not only help you in your personal life and become great friends, they can be the people who really help you land a job in the future. And that's something I hear time and again from our alumni is they are in the position, they got into the grad school they got help with their application from the people in their cohort. So just can't understate um, how fundamental something like doing a program, a study abroad program, can be in every aspect of your life. So I would highly encourage students to check out the CLS program. There's also so many opportunities to receive funding for study abroad. They're also offered by the US government. So there's other programs on State Department website that you can browse to see other fully funded programs, including Boren, Fulbright, Gilman. Those are other ones, but there's so many. And I know Jacob is a graduate of the Nestle program, which is another State Department funded program that I know he will be mentioning later, but tons of options. And then not to mention outside scholarships through your home university. Um, uh, Jacob also mentioned when he introduced me that I worked for an organization called ISEP Study Abroad. ISEP Study Abroad was an exchange network. So there's also can be opportunities to go on exchange programs, which also helps reduce the cost. And a lot of those you pay your home university tuition, and you're able to study abroad at a university overseas, and the cost is almost equal, or in some cases, it can be even less than if you were to stay at your home institution. So um, I want to definitely emphasize that study abroad is possible. It's possible if you're a STEM major. It's possible, as Matt mentioned, if you're a college athlete. I think a lot of people feel like it's not for them, or they can't make it fit with their academic goals. But I think that's the really key aspect is when you start thinking what's the right study abroad program for you, think of what you want to get out of it, personally and professionally. Talk with your resources at your university, your academic advisors, to see how you can make this work. Make sure that those credits will transfer so you don't end up doing a fifth year, because I know that's something a lot of people want to avoid, but it really is possible, and there's so many options out there. So I'm happy to clarify and dive deeper into those. But yeah, what makes CLS so unique is um, you really you really develop substantial language skills in a very short amount of time. You also receive um, equivalent to almost a year's worth of credit in a 8-week program. It's something I think that most people can fit into their academic coursework, and it won't prolong their time. studying. So yeah, happy to also answer questions after this about the CLS program in particular. But I think I'll leave it there and turn back to Jacob. Or sorry, turn back.
Gosh, all right, that's
Gosh,
fine.
sorry.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Next, we're gonna have Jacob Linglis. As mentioned before, he is a former study abroad student who has had the most recent experience studying abroad, and he's going to share with us that experience and how it's impacted his career.
Howdy, thanks. So, as mentioned, my study abroad was pretty recent. I've studied abroad twice, both times in South Korea, 2015 and 2019. So I started studying the Korean language during my freshman year in high school. I was, trying somewhat unsuccessfully to like self-teach myself Korean. And so I did that for a year and a half. And then I found out about the NISLE program, which is the National Security Language Initiative for Youth. And it's very similar to the CLS program in structure, format. It's a 6 to 8 week program where they took about 50 of us and put us in Seoul with host families going to a university there to learn Korean language. And this is for high school students. Most of my cohort was late 13 to maybe like 17 or 18. I was one of the older people in my cohort at 17 when I went on the program. And as Roy mentioned, this is a very intensive language study program, the same way CLS is. So in that, I think my program was roughly 7 weeks. We learned essentially the equivalent of 2 university courses. I was able to skip 101 and 102 Korean language courses at my university after taking the NISLE program. So that was my experience in 2015. And one of the big tenets of NISLE and CLS is that the programs are geared a lot towards teaching these critical languages, as previously mentioned, in the hopes that the students who go on these programs will keep up their language skills into the future and use those, whether that's through their professional careers, citizen diplomacy, however. And I want to say I've kept up with a large group of the people I went on program with. And for the most part, that's true. Most of those people still speak Korean very well. Several of them have studied abroad in Korea further. I still talk to them constantly. We help each other. I can certainly give personal testimony to what was said previously, that CLS and NISLE alumni, a lot of the opportunities we have post-program are specifically because of our experience with the program. That's completely true. It's not an exaggeration to say that every major opportunity I've had in the 7 years since is directly related to my experience on that program. So I was a high school student when I went, and at the time and afterwards, I was going to school on Saturdays to learn Korean. I kept that up in my undergraduate years at the University of Alabama, where I also studied abroad again in 2019. And that was through a program with Meridian International called it's the U.S. Congress Republic of Korea National Assembly Exchange Program. And where NISLE and CLS are like educational exchange programs, this is a professional exchange program where we spent a week in DC speaking with Congress people, think tank representatives who specifically engage in Korean American bilateral relationships, Korean affairs and things like that. And then you spend a week in Korea kind of doing the same thing. We went to the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, spoke to the US Embassy there, things like that. And so both of these experiences, both as a high school student and a college student, were kind of the defining points in my life. You know, that's really, when I think back, those are the 2 points in my life where things really changed. You know, Matt mentioned coming from, you know, Alabama, you don't sometimes get a lot of opportunity to interact with diverse cultures or things like that. And that was certainly the case for me. You know, grew up in a very, like, your stereotypical, like, middle class white neighborhood. And that was my experience up until high school. And so to go on these programs was eye opening. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. Um, just the ability to interact with so many different people, you know, students from across the US, students from South Korea, the relationships you build, those things are really invaluable, especially as a high school student. One thing I always recommend when I talk to people about this is start as early as you can. Um, NISLE, which, you know, you can technically do that as a freshman in high school. Start as early as you can, because they have a summer program and then a year program, and you can do both. So I did the summer program, and then unfortunately for me, I aged out before I was able to apply for the year program. So if you are a student, or if you know students and interact with them, really recommend these opportunities very early on. I mean, we don't use the term life-changing lightly in this context, because that's really how they are. You know, and I think the final thing I'll end on is kind of backing up to the point that your experiences on these programs, like, carry on throughout your life. Roy mentioned that a lot of the CLS alumni, you know, say they got their jobs because of this, and that's very much true. I know, for example, I studied abroad and then ended up working for Global Ties, working on study abroad programs. And I know of at least 6 people, not including myself, from my 2015 summer NISLE program who ended up working for various study abroad organizations. I got several, like, undergraduate research opportunities, and my research professor specifically said, you speak Korean, that's kind of like the defining thing and why we want to work with you. So those qualities in these programs are very much true, and the earlier you can start, the better. So I guess I'll end there.
Thank you, Jacob. That was great information. Now we're moving on to the Q&A. I know if we don't have any questions that I do have some questions, and I'd like to start with Rory just on a clarifying question. What is the difference between a study abroad and exchange program? I work for Global Ties Alabama. I know the answer to this question, but I just want to make sure for any audience members that they understand the difference.
Yeah. So what kind of an exchange looks like is, I like to describe it as swapping places. So essentially, one student has to leave their university. So universities can have exchange agreements with different schools. Or in the case of an organization like ISEP, a university can join our network of exchanges, and their students then can go on a program at one of our member institutions. And so an exchange is like, in order for you to participate in that program, you are swapping shoes with somebody else. And so in terms of your program cost, you pay the same tuition, the same housing and meals as at your home institution, to make room for that person to come and take your shoes and you fill their shoes. So hopefully that kind of gets it. I like to think, you can think of it as kind of like a house swap, that kind of situation. Whereas, I mean, on a study abroad program, on different study abroad programs, you might not necessarily need, you're not looking at a balance of outbound versus inbound, one person leaving, one person going. So we don't have to, for example, a program like CLS, we don't have to, we don't have that kind of restriction on, we can only send so many students to one place because we only have so many spots and that kind of thing. So it's just a different sort of, there's a bit of a more complicated calculation when you're working with exchanges, but yeah, hopefully that answered it okay.
Yeah, that's great clarity. Great clarity. I have a question for Matt. I noticed that you said you lived in Russia for 7 years. I personally have not studied abroad. I do have to admit that, but I did live with my family in Japan for 7 years. And one of the biggest differences that I can see between studying abroad and living abroad is that immediate support system I had. I had my mom, my dad, my sister, and a grandparent with us. So anytime that I was, overwhelmed by culture or the society and the socials around me, I could always go back and find that normal thing, my family. And so for Matt, I was wondering, the longer you live in Russia, what did that support system look like? Did you add in Russian people? Was it more contact over the phone? What did that look like for you the longer you lived there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, you're right. The first year, I was there for a full academic year in the initial period, and you have the support of the program, right? The program staff, the other American students who are there. And I was lucky too that living in a host family as well for that full, I think it was like 10 months. My Russian language ability really progressed rapidly over that period of time. And so once I decided to stay and do the master's program, then it was a program with a bunch of other international students. And then I wasn't living with a host family, I was living with other international students. So, I had a roommate from Finland, a roommate from Switzerland, and then there was another American. So you build up the connections of local people that you've met over that period of time. I was obviously still in touch with my host family too, and I still am now, actually, because you live with a family like that for that amount of time, and they're really your mom, your second mom, and your dad. And Russia was a difficult place. I mean, I didn't speak. I mean, I tried to teach myself, like Jacob was saying, I tried to teach myself a little bit before I went, and I could say, hello, how are you? Where's the bathroom? That kind of thing. But, I didn't speak really any Russian. I started at the elementary level. And I remember, several nights sitting in my, host family, just thinking this was a bad idea. Just thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand anything. People are talking to me. I'm just like shaking my head thinking, I've got myself, in deep. And then one day things just changed, and you don't even remember when it happened. So it's so I don't know, I think everybody's experience is different, but after that, after having lived there for 2 years, having completed that year and then completed the master's program, I had a lot of local friends at that point too, and I'd started working, so I had colleagues. You also get kind of mixed in with the expat community, other foreigners that are there kind of sharing the same kind of cultural differences that you are used to. But it's just a slow process of adapting, and language helps, because I know I had expat friends who had lived there for a decade or more, and they didn't really speak the language. And I mean, and their experience and integration was totally different than people like me who were really just a part of the community. I mean, I spoke Russian, I worked in Russian, so that makes a big difference.
That was great. Thank you, Matt. And the last question is for Jacob, as well as anyone that wants to answer it. I think one of the biggest battles of traveling anywhere, but especially overseas, is battling expectations. You do research on a location and do a culture and your people, and you come up with an idea or an image in your head of what it's going to be like. For visiting South Korea, what expectations did you have? And then what was the reality you faced? Was it a positive reality, negative to what you thought you would have? What were those expectations like?
That's kind of an interesting question. I think, especially being young, relatively, you do kind of build almost like an idealized version in your head of what it's going to be like. And I think for me, that was mainly, I don't know, I felt at that time like it was just going to be very different, from my everyday life, that things were going to be just weird and new. I didn't necessarily have any expectations of like the city itself or the people, but rather like what my experience was going to be like. And I got there and it was very like almost mundane. You know, my teachers were, you know, they were normal people. You know, my friends in Korea had normal lives. And so that was kind of almost a shock to me in a way that it probably shouldn't have been. Just how normal it was to be there. And just kind of be an average person in Seoul. So that was kind of my experience there. I know a lot of the people I went with did have some expectations of specifically Seoul, but like Korea in general as being this really like high tech, you know, like like high tech, like paradise almost. And they got very quickly discouraged of those notions. Because South Korea does have public Wi-Fi in some places, but in 2015 it really wasn't good. It was hard to access. You know, there is a lot of high technology enterprise in South Korea, but your average everyday person really doesn't experience that. And I know a lot of people I was there with were very shocked at that specifically.
That's great. Thank you, Jacob. I love talking about that with people who travel, especially first-time travelers. Is just what do you think you're gonna see? What do you think you're gonna do? And then they come back and they're often like, well, it was just what we did here, but in Korea or wherever else in the world. So it's great to know that like we're all connected through that. That we're all very similar. We all have a lot of shared experiences. And now I do want to add that we do have Commissioner Edwards on the call. And I know that we went through the Q&A, and I will ask her if she has anything she wants to add in terms of her experience with studying abroad and how it's affected her career. We'd love to have you chat about that.
Hello, everybody, and I am so sorry. My name is Violet Edwards. I am the Commissioner of District 6 in Madison County, Alabama. I was an exchange student in 1994 to Germany as part of the Congress Bundesstaat. It was a program between our government and their government that helped students go and study abroad. So I was 17. I was a senior in high school. It was my first time really traveling outside of my small town in Cordova, Alabama. I got interested just because I wanted to get away, and the government gave me some money to do it. And it was, it was just 3 years after the Berlin Wall went down, and they said Germany, and I said, sign me up. So I went to Germany knowing absolutely no German at 17, 2 years after the wall fell, and it was a wonderful experience. I got there, I got to travel, got over a lot of fears. I got to see the world. I got to see Europe, and I came back and I minored in German. And that was great. I went to school at the University of Alabama. And while I was exchanging, they announced that Mercedes-Benz would be building right outside of Tuscaloosa. And I immediately applied to Mercedes-Benz as a translator, as a student. And I got the job, yay! And then my parents wouldn't let me take it. And this happened because while I was proficient in German, I hated school. I was a good student, but I was a terrible student because I did not like to go to class. And my mother was afraid that if at 20, if I got this part-time job paying $20 an hour, that I would not go to class, and she was probably right. So I had to turn down that job as a translator. And when I graduated, they didn't have a place for me. And I ended up with my career in journalism, which was journalism was my major and German was my minor. So it absolutely, the experience changed the course of my life and just international travel, or really travel at all outside of the small, tiny town in Alabama. And I went on to minor in it. Today, can I speak German? Not very well, because I don't get to speak it very often now here on my job, but I can definitely see how the experience shaped me, molded me. My mother hosted an exchange student for 2 years, both my senior year and after I got back and went to university. And then I've worked with a program here that brings in exchange students. So once just the exposure has just been fantastic, something that I've taken with me throughout my lifetime. And I'm just blessed that I was able to do it. That's me in 5 minutes.
That's amazing. And what's great is that despite not being here on the call earlier, you hit all of our talking points. Just that it's worth it, that what you've done studying abroad has impacted your career, that what you learned is something you carry with you. I think I was really worried because everybody else on the call, they have a background in international relations. They're doing open world, they're doing the study abroad, and then Jacob is with us at Global Ties. And so I wanted to bring somebody on the call who did study abroad, but isn't doing study abroad now or doing something related to specifically international relations. So it's good to see that even if your pursuit isn't in global interests, that studying abroad does affect your career if it's home side and if it's local. I think just adding perspective to your life from somewhere else is going to help you.
Yes.
So that's great. And if there's no questions for Commissioner Edwards, that's it for today. Thank you for everyone. We're going to have this recording up. If anyone requests it, we'll send it their way. And for all the future students who are looking into study abroad, we'll have those links for you to look at those opportunities from Rory. Thanks again to all of our panelists and to all of our audience. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.